My name is Horst Simon. I'm the director of ADIA Lab, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our second ADIA Lab seminar. And it's also a great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Alex Lipton, who will talk about a topic that all of us concerns: where does money come from? Alex is the global head of quantitative research and development and portfolio oversight at ADIA. He is co-founder and strategic advisor to the CEO at Sila Money, a company that he helped founding. He is a connection science fellow at MIT and a visiting professor and dean's fellow at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. His background is in large-scale portfolio optimization, impact of climate change, investment decisions, risk management, digitization, and CBDC. Alex is a strong thought leader with a proven track record in managing large quantitative organizations in challenging environments, building teams from scratch and merging existing teams and realigning teams to fulfill new mandates. So it's my great pleasure with his background and skills to have Alex as a member of the ADIA Lab Advisory Board. And so his current interests include digitization and multiple aspects of fintech, including distributed ledger and other applications of cryptography in banking and payment systems. And so he will talk about these interests today, and in particular, he is author of a very recent book on blockchain and distributed ledgers, and so he will mention about this. And so with all these introductions, thank you, Alex, for being our speaker, and welcome.
Thank you, Horst, for this extremely kind and detailed introduction. It gives me a great pleasure to present here at ADGM Academy as part of the lecture series which ADIA Lab is developing as we speak, and we already had one lecture by Professor Marcos Lopez de Prada. This is the second one. Then the third one would be by Professor Miguel Hernan from Harvard, and then some more. And what I want to talk about is the question which I'm sure everybody is interested in: where does money come from? So the honest answer is, I wish I knew, and if I did, then I would not be here speaking to you guys, but probably on some island, on the beach, but that would have to wait till Saturday, right? So here is what I want to talk about. So money and its functions, how money is created, a monetary circuit. This is something which interests me dearly, and I think is appreciated by the community. It's a very important topic. Stock flow consistent of the economy, bank money. So not surprisingly, in the fiat environment, which we are all living in, banks and money are more or less synonymous, right? So then what were the kind of slow evolution from money represented by objects to golds and silver standard to Bretton Woods system, and then finally fiat, ways of organizing information in general and financial information in particular, how we can use blockchain to maybe get a better grasp of what is going on, given the complexity of topics which we need to face. Then, of course, once we say the word blockchain, we should also talk about smart contracts and decentralized finance, CBDCs and stable coins, automated market makers, digital trade coins, and then I will draw my conclusion. My experience suggests that I will not be able to cover all these topics, but we will go as far as it gets us, and then we will stop and answer questions, if any. All right, so there are two sources of the information which I want to cover. One is a book written by Adrian Tricani and myself, and the other one a book which written by Alex Pentland, Thomas Harjon, and myself, and they cover some of the topics which we will be covering today. So I will start with Aristotle quote. Well, it's always nice to start with a referral to antiquity. First of all, it immediately gives you credibility as a thought leader. And second of all, it seems like people in antiquity actually understood much more than we think they kind of commonly understood. And it's also very interesting that this wisdom was transferred to the English language through the Arabic, because the original Greek books typically didn't survive. They only survived in the Arabic translation. But anyway, so what Aristotle said is that money has been introduced by convention and is a substitute for demand. That much is clear, and it is derived not from nature but from law, and that is quite important, as we will see. However, something interesting happened on the way to the market, as they say. So, like 15 years ago, a little less than that, this Bitcoin was introduced, and for the first time ever, we actually see the value of crypto money, which is derived from entertainment as much as anything else. And we should not be underestimating this element of value, right? So money serves numerous functions, and reasonable people can disagree about what it really is, but nevertheless, some functions of money are sort of beyond dispute. So it has to serve as a medium of exchange, a means of payment of taxes, and I emphasize this separately from payments in general, because I'm of the opinion, and many other people, that whatever is used to pay tax eventually becomes money. It's a store of value, unit of account, and finally, it's a perpetual call option for acquiring goods and services and discharging obligations. And so the monetary system went through a kind of very long evolution. At first, it was object-based, right? So it was object-based, even though in the oldest systems, objects actually did coexist with records. In fact, some people, myself included, think that the writing itself was invented in order to formalize monetary relationships. And it happened in Sumer, like 4,000 years ago, about that sort of thing. So then, like object-oriented money switched to gold, silver, and bimetallism standards. Eventually, this system was abolished because of its complexity and lack of discipline by the government who tried to impose it. So they switched to, and of course, needless to say, two world wars, which really knocked the foundation underneath the gold-based system. And then, of course, it was replaced by Bretton Woods, which again did not last for very long, from 1944 to 1973, when it was replaced by a Plaza Accord and a fiat, free-floating fiat money. So that's where we are right now. I feel that we can actually achieve more with modern technology and maybe resurrect some of the element of commodity money in its best features, right? So one thing which is certain about fiat, or any other money for that matter, that it never, never serves the stated objective of being a store of value. It is a store of value for a short period of time, but never for a long period of time. So if we look at, for example, this graph here, it shows the value of a US dollar since 1799. And then you can see there were periods of deflation when the old dollars were actually worth much more than the new ones. But eventually, after the First World War and the trials and tribulation of the Great Depression and the Second World War, the value of the US dollar started to decline precipitously. And right now, it's maybe about 5% of what it used to be in the old days. And you can say, okay, it's a fiat, it's not backed by anything except for the faith of the government. And maybe if we were to use gold or silver is a more durable kind of material and easier to use, and then it would be good. But in the classical antiquity, in the Roman Empire, the composition of silver itself in the Roman denarius fell precipitously over a period of 250 years, pretty much to zero, right? So, and some of people I work with, Sandy Pentland, Harjon, and myself, we feel that the time has come for Bretton Woods, and that can do a lot of good to the society, right? So So now, what are the theories of money creation? So credit creation, credit creation theory of banking, and it goes all the way back to the 19th century, and it was sort of well understood in the beginning of the 20th century, especially by the German scientists, bankers turned scientists, because they knew how the banks really operate. Fractional reserve theory of banking, that is what is being taught in standard courses, but that seems to be really, as far as I can see, a fable, right? This theory really doesn't have any scientific foundation, and even less so financial intermediation theory of banking, not least because this theory actually neglects the banking sector as such, right? So it's really difficult to describe things about a certain industry if you kind of neglect existence, all right? So basically, we can think about money as moving in a gigantic monetary circuit, and the movement happens between central bank, the government, private banks, households, and firms. And here is a little movie for you, which will show you how it, if it runs. Yes, it does. So how it evolved over a period of 70 years or so. You can see that flows and the thickness of arrows and the direction clearly shows from where money goes, from which sector the money goes to which, right? So you can see, and now look at something interesting happening in the global financial crisis. You see, so the global financial crisis is upon us on this graph, and you can see massive changes in monetary flows from conventional sort of flows as they were under normal circumstances. So by studying this, you can actually go very far in understanding what's going on. So it will stop shortly, and we can then look at further results. So, right. Okay, so that was the movie, as best as I could do in a PDF file. And so now, kind of, if we want to describe these flows from the sectors, we need to introduce various kind of actors, workers, rentiers, firms, banks, and then we will denote stocks, which are sort of what is accumulated with sigma, and theta would derive flows, which is changes in sigma, deposits and loans. And then, of course, the productivity has to be accounted for, which shows how many units of production per worker. And then population, these models have to take into account how many workers there are and so on and so forth. Deposits, loans, physical assets, an interesting thing. And we will see later on when we look at blockchains that, this physicality and physical and digital assets are not closely linked in this system, but we have to, and then rates of deposits, loans, and things like that. So basically, we have to introduce all the machinery, and then, it will continue. And so now we will see what we really want to understand as the flows of financial and non-financial stocks, and what would be the balancing variable. The balancing variable is the capital of banks, right? So it's a total amount of loans minus total amount of deposit. I want to emphasize one thing which is not clear to many people who have not had this experience. Somehow they think that bank capital, is there some cash which is set somewhere, or gold or whatever? No, this is just a balancing variable. There is nothing behind, this bank capital, except for the preoccupation of the regulators and the bankers themselves in the requirement that the total amount of assets should exceed total amount of liabilities. Banks are really complicatedly regulated in a fairly complicated way. So the amount of capital tells you how much you can acquire as far as assets are concerned, and then cash kept at central bank tells you how many how much money you can take as deposits. So this regulates both sides of the balance sheet. And of course, the total stock of financial and non-financial assets belonging to the rentiers as a class is given by this difference. And then the kind of the equations were going like for Keene, Grasselli, and Costa Lima, and many other people. And so essentially, the objective is to describe the workers' share of production, the relative employment rate, and the firm's debt relative to their non-financial assets. So these are three main three main variables, and you can see that you can write what is loosely reminds us of a Volterra-Lotka equation describing a predator-prey, dynamics of like how many hares versus how many wolves and that sort of thing. So, well, I'm not gonna go into who is represents a hare and who represents a wolf. You can figure it out yourself. But anyway, so that's the type of equation we want to do. But these equations are not really enough. So we need to augment it, so that basically we need to expand this equation. So we have to incorporate effects of default and other things like that. And so key relation is for production and consumption. And so and the difference between rentiers and workers is that workers really consume what they earn, while rentiers' consumption is discretionary. Once you realize this, you can actually write down all the relationship of what firms invest vis-a-vis their overall production. And so the production depends on essentially rentier's consumption. That's kind of the key thing here. And then once we realize that, we can figure out what would be the capacity utilization, what would be the firm's profits, and things like that. And then we can calculate banks' profits. Again, this is, what they charge vis-a-vis loan versus what they pay for deposits. So for the longest of time, banks were paying nothing, but now it's actually changing a little bit. And of course, what can be lost for default. Once you account all of this, and I'm not going to kind of go through this in much detail, I will just show you the outcome of the calculation. But essentially, once you do all this, the key message is that everything depends on rentiers. And then, like everything else depends, kind of the firm grow because they invest, and things like that. So this is the main equation of the monetary circuit, which is stock flow consistent, and it basically describes every free variable which is in the system. And these equations are closed and scale invariant, and production is equal to consumption plus investment. This equation is stochastic, and you can basically calculate everything you want. So here, various quantities which are shown, like consumption, the cycle of employment, and things of that nature. And you can also look at it from a different angle, like three variable, like time-dependent trajectories of all these relevant variables. And then you can also see, how kind of this unemployment cycle versus the fraction of the production which goes to the workers' dependent time. Right. So that was sort of a little complicated, and I knew that would be a little hard to follow. But the message which I want to drive is that if you look at the economy as a whole, you will see that there are flows, and there are flows between different classes, if you wish, and these flows have to be accounted for. However, there is one very important thing. Where does this money, which is the glue, which is the lubricant, well, glue is slightly different. Occasionally it's a glue. But anyway, so it's a lubricant which actually moves the wheels of commerce. Which moment does it enter the system? And so here, the kind of essential viewpoint of this theory, and many people who share, is that essentially banks create money out of thin air by a simple act of lending. And here is a simple case when there is a bank and somebody comes and wants to borrow some money, and suppose bank lends the money, and then it simultaneously creates a deposit and an asset. And then when the money, and so that's when the money is created. When the money is destroyed, there are two possibilities. One is if the money is actually repaid, then if you look carefully at this graph here, you will see that before the assets and the liabilities were finally matched, now of course as well, but there is a little more equity, which means capital, and a little more asset. What is left is a sliver of interest paid by the borrower when they repay the money. The rest of it is destroyed. So that's the rate at which money grows. However, there is a situation when the borrower cannot pay back and defaults. In this case, of course, the capital is reduced, right? So deposits are the same, but the capital is reduced. And that's the situation which is basically quite dangerous, because the act of creation of money was not accompanied with the destruction of money. And hence, from the standpoint of the state, this money which was not repaid essentially is entering the system as a forged money. So it's basically the act of defaulting is actually tantamount to actually forging money. And that's how it works. And here is a more complicated situation when the person borrows from one bank but deposits in another bank. Then there would be imbalance between the preference for capital and liquid assets on the side of one bank and the other, because banks really need to have enough assets and liabilities to make sure that they're profitable. In fact, it's kind of a folly to assume that banks strive to become, say, AAA. So the dream of a bank is to be a AAA. That's not true. In fact, in the whole world, there are very few AAA banks. Well, not surprisingly, you can find one in the Netherlands, but other than that, everything else is basically A or BBB, that sort of thing. And so basically, banks will interact with each other in such a way that they will balance, and so they become interconnected. So basically, the key understanding of the modern financial system based on fiat is that banks are interconnected. The same way as when you go to the souk and look at row after row of people who sell silk, right? So you would think maybe they want to kind of spread around so that people do not really come to the same, but no, they really want to be together. So in this regard, banks are, of course, operating a gigantic digital souk, and they also are all together. And so the difference between, this is a balance sheet of just an ordinary firm. It has asset, liability, and equity. And this is assets of a bank. And you can see it's very different in the sense that there are interbank liabilities and interbank assets. And that's how banks are connected with each other. Now, in principle, conventional bank is like that: interbank liabilities, interbank assets, and some external assets. But we can also think about a narrow bank. That's something which I myself tried to build after I left Bank of America, but it didn't work very well, because I was told that we'll never get a license to have a narrow bank, even though it's kind of totally innocuous, because it only has central bank cash as an asset, and liabilities, like deposits from firms and people on the and capital on the liability side. But by building a bank like that, you will shirk the utmost responsibility of a bank to actually lend money. And so that's kind of and that can actually, if this were to be introduced, could really seriously undermine the financial system. So it was not an unqualified success, but then we co-founded Sila, which essentially is not a bank, of course, by any stretch of imagination, but operates on similar principle, and that was fine. So anyway, so the fiat system, because it relies on many intermediaries of various hues, it actually has to be very complicated. And this is a typical snapshot of how the settlement system operates in the United States. And you can see that Fed account is a sort of deposit with the central bank, is a lingua franca of all the banks. They cannot talk to each other directly. They have to talk to each other, exchange value through the central bank. And you can see how it all centered around here. And of course, if you have to deal with several central banks in case you want to make foreign exchange payments, then the system becomes even more complicated. It's slow, very unreliable. Oh, well, I will take it back. It's reliable, but very slow, unpredictable. That's what I wanted to say. Unpredictable and quite expensive. And in the end of the day, expense of a system is what frictions, is what separates, possibility of enormous flourishing of, say, e-commerce versus just having e-commerce, right? So now, one of the problems, the reason why the money actually constantly loses its value is because the supply of money is constantly increases. And we can see here really a dramatic event, the change in M1, which constitute coin and all the checking account and banks, at least in the United States, that's the definition. And you can see that during the beginning of the COVID crisis, there was a dramatic change in all these quantities. So that really had massive implications for the inflation which we go through right now. And you can see how the kind of monetary base is 5 trillion, M1 as a monetary base plus accounts as 18 trillion, and so on and so forth, until up to and including money of zero maturity of 20 trillion. Right, so you can see something happened. What has happened until say 2008? As I said, money was exclusively created by commercial banks. However, during the first crisis in 2008, the assets and liabilities of the Federal Reserve increased quite dramatically. Until then, they were quite small, but then they increased. And then the second increase during the COVID crisis brought the overall assets of the Federal Reserve and the corresponding liabilities, which are pretty much fine-tuned because the actual capital of Federal Reserve is quite small. And it's not the same as what they want from commercial bank, when a good position would be to have 10% capital. Anyway, so you can see the following interesting thing. So if you can look at total assets of commercial banks, they are currently in the United States about, say, 23 trillion. And then if you look at the assets of the Federal Reserve, they're in the tune of 8 trillion. So basically, a very substantial proportion of the overall banking assets belongs to the Federal Reserve. So it becomes a dominant player. And actually, when people were saying that Federal Reserve creates money, until recently it was not true at all, right? But now it actually true. So it does create a lot of money on its own by monetizing illiquid assets. So there are several things which we have to think about money if we want to design properly central bank digital currencies and things like that. So what are the properties? So cash is central bank issued. It's not electronic. It's peer-to-peer and universal. So in other words, cash has remarkable properties. It's remarkably attractive, except for the fact that it's not electronic. And so that is basically where we want to strive. And I'm very happy to see that Professor Chaum had time to come and attend this talk, because we will discuss some of his ideas and some other ideas along these lines. So commercial bank deposits, that's where kind of this money is created, so to speak, M1 if you wish. So M1 minus cash. So it's not central bank issued, it's issued by commercial banks. It is electronic, it's not peer-to-peer. As I said, you cannot move money directly from Citibank to Chase or from ADCB to First Abu Dhabi Bank. It has to go through central bank. Central bank deposits, so they are central bank issued, electronic, peer-to-peer, and but they're not universal. And not peer-to-peer and not universal. I'm sorry. And then CBDC. That's what we want. So the replacement for cash. So it's central bank issued. It's electronic. It's peer-to-peer. And it is universal. Then commodity money. Commodity money is something which we will talk about if there is time. It's not central bank issued, and it's a good thing. It's not yet electronic, but it can be made electronic. It's peer-to-peer and universal. Then stable coins, that's a replacement for the time being of central bank digital currencies. So they're not central bank issued. They are may or may not be peer-to-peer and may not be universal, but they certainly electronic. Then finally, native cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and others. So obviously, they're not central bank issued. They're electronic. They're peer-to-peer, and they're universal. So that's the classification. And then it brings us to the topic of how to organize the information. So we can organize information in a centralized fashion, like it's shown here. So think about it as a commercial bank and central bank, say in the United States, for example. We can so it's centralized, decentralized. Here it's kind of several economies. So say US, for example, Europe, and say Japan or whatnot. And then finally it can be distributed, where essentially nodes are linked to other nodes directly. I don't mean to say that every node is linked to every other node, but there are simple passes which you can draw to get from one node to the other. And so basically, we can ask ourselves, do we need a blockchain for that? Well, a tentative answer is yes. So because we have thousands of transactions per second, and if they're recorded by individual participants, then basically it can be difficult to reconcile and can cause fraud and efficiency and things like that. Whilst the blockchain is a shared distributed ledger, which facilitates the process of recording transactions. Having said that, of course, given all this atrocities happening, which have happened recently, you can say that it's also a source of fraud and inefficiencies. This is true to a point, except for the fact that at the protocol level, it's basically quite impervious to attacks. It's basically happening at periphery, and I will be talking about it a little later. Right, so there might be, distributed ledger which could come in several flavors: unpermissioned public ledgers, permissioned private ledgers, and final traditional centralized ledgers, maybe with some notaries. And in order to make sure that these ledgers, which essentially every party should see roughly the same, except for the very recent transactions, which are perfectly legitimately can be different. So you can have different consensus mechanisms, such as a proof of work, proof of stake, and things like that. And so the idea is that rather than having this rather complicated system of moving money around, you can have something which is a combination of a distributed ledger and Twitter, so to speak, if you wish. So if Alice wants to pay to Bob, and she does have the coin, she can just announce to the blockchain that to the network that she wants to do this, and then it will all happen automatically by miners who will compete to approve her transaction, and notaries who would just record this. So that's roughly kind of how it will work. And then, of course, there are sort of some relatively simple blockchain, like the Prime model, the original blockchain invented by Satoshi Nakamoto, which is not exactly compatible directly with smart contracts. And then there are deviations built on top of it, like Ethereum, where it actually has smart contracts, which essentially self-executing pieces of code, and they provide autonomy, trust, reliability, saving, and accuracy. But a word of warning is that every adjective here can be turned into its negative. So basically, if something is written incorrectly, that there is no trust, no reliability, no savings, and so on and so forth. So it's really something which requires rather high level of coding to be really useful, because the system itself is unforgiving. If money is involved and a bug is in the code, then it will execute itself until the money is gone. Right? And so smart contracts are programmable financial instruments, and Ethereum, among many other layer 1 protocols, provides consensus as a service at a price. which makes essentially smart contract immutable. And of course, transactions are visible to all, so smart contracts can be audited by all. And as a result, if there are bugs, they will be discovered pretty quickly. There is nothing which sharpens people's instinct as a possibility of getting a bounty for finding bugs, in the smart contracts. And so consensus is very expensive, but nevertheless, it's an interesting direction. So, Ethereum can be used as a foundational level for decentralized finance. And, decentralized finance moves away by building things like the distributed autonomous organization, which is actually quite difficult to build, and there are not that many successful. And essentially, it harks back on the 18th century thinking of the encyclopedists that like this human body is a machine and heart is an engine and stuff like that. So basically, the same idea of trying to decompose an organization and its functions and try to describe it with smart contracts. It's difficult to imagine that it will be massively successful. Decentralized exchanges, payments and stable coins, yield farming. Again, I mean, one has to understand that if overall prevailing interest rate is 0 and somebody offers you 10 or 15%, it means that there are kind of tremendous risks, regardless of what you're being promised. Tokenization, gaming, identity provision, and things like that. So as I said, it was an important discovery, right? So of introduction of this blockchain in the form of Bitcoin and Ethereum, but they never actually started to play the role of money in full. And here you can see it very clearly. So for the last 2.5 years, essentially, it's basically a speculative asset. And you can also see that the correlation between the price of Bitcoin and the price of Ether is pretty much remarkable. So which means that really people just buy them as speculative asset. As far as I'm concerned, I would view Bitcoin protocol and Bitcoin as tokens in a giant casino, but I don't want this to sound as a necessarily super negative. All I'm trying to say is that new Bitcoins cannot be produced. So essentially, there is a rule which tells you how they are produced. And then, of course, the game is very simple. You buy it at the price A, and you wait until somebody else buys it at the price B. So the difference between, say, Bitcoin and other coins is that you cannot at will say that I have 1 million Bitcoins if I don't, right? So that's the difference. So basically, when people say it's a giant casino, it's actually true, but whether it's a particularly bad thing or we should go back to the old observation of Aristotle and remember that it's kind of coming from the entertainment, it's a different thing. And besides, if you look at the biggest, hotels and stuff like that in Macau or in Las Vegas, it seems that it's a reasonable business, right? So anyway, but that's still a little bit of an entertaining. What if we want the money to actually work hard for us in an electronic form? Then we should try to build central bank issued digital currency. So it can be done, in a variety of ways. One of the most attractive is going back to the original ideas of David Chaum and, building a cash which basically is semi-autonomous. It's autonomous as far as the buyer is concerned, but not as the seller is concerned. And these ideas are, kind of never died. I mean, it was not a very successful operation in the end of 90s, but nevertheless, these ideas never died, and right now they are kind of advocated by many people, including Professor Chow, in a variety of forms, and also there is Thaler, like this movement in this direction. The other possibility, of course, is to issue central bank digital currency on a blockchain. So that is an open question. So, for example, the most successful experiment so far which is renminbi, it's actually not using any blockchain at all. And right now it had been deployed to about 250 million people, which of course is a small fraction of the Chinese population, but still by any other standard is quite remarkable. But it does not use any blockchain at all. All right. So the requirements, technical specification for CBDCs are quite remarkable. So essentially, it has to be anonymous or pseudonymous, and it has to be, of course, secure. It has to be divisible. It has to be future-proof. So when technology grows, we should not be abandoning money. So recently, I had an experience of that sort. So I needed to send a fax to the United States, where they still quite actively use, not as much as in Japan, but still, it required all my colleagues at ADIA, who are very, very capable of doing things like that, like 3 days to figure out how to send a fax. And, that would be very bad if we build a CBDC, which in 5 to 7 years would just lose its capacity. So future-proof is very important. High throughput capable. So 20,000, 40,000, maybe 100,000 is a must. Let me remind you by contrast that Bitcoin actually is capable only of 6 transactions per second, right? So the payment has to be instantaneous and final, and has to extinguish all obligation. That's the big difference between, say, paying with a credit card and paying with cash. It extinguishes things on the spot, and that is it, right? It has to be interoperable. That's a very, very important thing. That's something which Sandy Pantlan, Thomas Harjona, and I have been actively working on at MIT, well, among many other people. And it's very important if we want to exchange one card to the next. And that's where I see the most important thing. Of course, it has to be non-reproducible. So it shouldn't be copied or reused. It should be usable offline and online and resilient and transferable. So all this is quite complicated from a technical perspective. And then it also brings us to the issue of KYC, know your customer, and anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing and things like that. So one possibility is to central bank themselves issues a CBDC and essentially open themselves to everyone and his uncle becoming a customer of the central bank itself. Central banks are powerful organizations, but they're small and they're not equipped to solve this KYC problem at all. Essentially, their function is to supervise commercial banks who actually do this. And so this schema, as far as I can see, is dead in the water, even though it is discussed by many, but it has no chance. So the intermediate schema where commercial banks and payment service providers distribute central bank digital coin to the public and firms and so on and so forth is much more palatable. Again, depending on what level of reliability you want, this intermediaries might or might not be suitably done by commercial banks, because it might also be that it's better to build a build narrow bank, because this bank cannot default. That's the attraction of the narrow bank, right? So this is an open question. And again, this CBDC can operate at different level. It can be wholesale CBDC, which operates among banks. So, for example, the idea of, say, a company named Clearmatics, where I'm an advisor, kind of in London, they want to do it this way. Then, of course, you have to have a consortium of banks represented by a narrow bank. Otherwise, you will not be able to do this. With retail, where kind of tolerance to risk is a little higher, then high rated commercial banks can do this. Now there is an interesting possibility of having a digital banknotes where they can be used as ordinary cash until and unless you remove this cover and reveal the private and public key associated with this banknote, and then you can use it once once for digital payment, and after that, of course, it becomes not usable, right? So it becomes just an artifact. But that's one way of also solving this conundrum articulated many years ago by Professor Chaum, how to make payment anonymous. So you can kind of distribute this type of cash and then sort of convert it into digital, right? The other thing, which is also very important and quite vexing, is how to make sure that central bank cash operates offline. That is an absolute must, and it requires considerable technical prowess to accomplish it. And as far as I heard, very recently, the Chinese renminbi, e-renminbi achieved this feature, right? So there should be protocols, military-style challenge response protocols and counters built in your telephones, which will allow you to kind of do this type of payments. Stable coins is temporary replacement, as far as I can see, or maybe permanent augmentation of central bank digital currencies, which essentially, play the same role as central bank cash, provided that they correctly design. So fully collateralized custodial tokens is the only way to do it. And those by design are somewhat centralized. Tokens over collateralized with cryptos, it's an interesting idea and they seem to be working, but it goes against the tenets of high finance, because it requires not under collateralization but over collateralization, and that goes against trading on the margin and things like that. And finally, a thing which is called dynamically stabilized coin tokens. You know what? As we all know, it's extremely hard to predict the past. But the future is even more so. But in this book, which I mentioned with Trikani, we did have a section which explained in plain English that dynamically stabilized tokens are just not possible and will always collapse. I tried to explain it to Mike Novogratz, a popular kind of enthusiast of cryptocurrencies, and he didn't want to listen to me and put on a tattoo of Terra Luna combination. So needless to say, it's that 2 weeks after he put on the tattoo, the whole thing collapsed. And so now, well, it's a lesson for him and it's a lesson for me. But anyway, so you can see here USDT, which is a tether, so which more or less retains its value, and it's a collateralized coin, but nobody really knows where the collateral is and how it's kind of regulated and things like that. So despite that, it retains its value. So the other one is DAI. It's over collateralized with, crypto, more specifically this one with Ether. And again, it's pretty much stable. And then finally, this dynamically stabilizes Terra Luna. And of course, it collapsed. And we can see it in greater detail. So basically, blue is shown the coin which is on the left scale, and it should be 1, and you can see that it collapsed to 0. And then on the other kind, it's counterbalanced, Luna, and it went all the way to 120 and also collapsed to 0. So if you think about, the idea of dynamically stabilizing a coin, you can think about this contraption, which is called Kapitsa's pendulum, and essentially it tells you that you can stabilize an object, say pencil, vertically up, not vertically down, provided that the base moves fast enough in a proper way. And so clearly, once you can start moving it a little too fast or a little too slow, the whole thing will collapse. And that's precisely what happened to this Terra Luna. Now we can look at the market capitalization of Bitcoin, which is, well, at the moment when Alexei Kondratyev and I put this graphs together, which was 2 weeks ago, a week ago, 435 billion, Ethereum 190 billion, and Tether at 65 billion. However, if you look at daily trading volume, you will see that Tether actually has much higher trading volume than either of the two, which means that electronic money can have extremely high velocity. So you see, this is market capitalization, but Tether moves so fast that it can be used and used again and again. And so the velocity of money is remarkably high compared, say, to conventional cash. And then, of course, I need to wrap things up. But essentially, what I wanted to say is that there are kind of automated market makers like Uniswap, Balancer, and others, which can be used in order to basically exchange one fiat to the other. So this is a kind of a suggestion which a student of mine and now a quant at Signum Bank in Zurich and I, Arthur Sepp and I, made a while back, and now it's being taken with gusto by the Bank of International Settlement, Monetary Authority of Singapore, and other big players. So essentially, what it says is that you can become a liquidity provider by simultaneously putting in the smart contract two types of assets, say US dollar and, for example, euro. And then you can take liquidity taker by taking whatever you want, either dollar or euro, and putting the other side of the pair back. So you can actually do it algorithmically, for example, by imposing a constant product rule, or many other rules like that, but it's a well-defined product rule, and you can see the composition of the pool depending on what you do. And here I show three different pools: a constant sum, constant product, and a mixed rule. And then the actual intrinsic value of one currency vis-a-vis the next is simply defined by the derivative of dy over dx. And you can see it here in a constant sum rule. There's perfect liquidity in the sense that the price really doesn't change and then of course it changes for mixed rule and the product, right? And so you can also see the position of you can see the composition in different instances depending on the actual price of this coin in the outside world, right? So the whole thing operates through relentless arbitrage of your liquidity pool and establishing an equilibrium this way. But of course, it comes with a implied loss. And of course, this implied loss, depending on how much you want to earn, it can be quite big because there's no miracle here. And you can study the whole thing, relative P&L, for this pools, and so you can see that in general you do have a certain benefit, but not huge. And then the product itself cripples up as it should because of the transaction cost. Because when you put one currency in, you take the other currency out a little less than you should, or otherwise the whole thing will collapse. And so what I'm trying to say is that automated market making can be used for fiat. And right now this is a big effort by the Bank of International Settlement, Monetary Authority of Singapore, Banque de France, and the other players. And this is called Project Mariana, and that's basically how they want to set it up. And you can also see how it works, euro area. Euro goes into just common pool, which is a pool of, kind of things which should be interoperable, Swiss franc and Singaporean dollar, and then they form bilateral pools and operate liquidity provisions through automated market making on a bilateral basis, or they generalize and do it on a trilateral basis. And as calculation of Arthur Sepp and I show, in principle, it is a relatively profitable proposition. And I have to stop here, but I will just finish with this. So I wanted to describe how to create an international currency which would have some foundation in commodities and things like that. And there is a great impetus in a multipolar world to try and build a system which actually has an international store of value. A system like that does not exist yet, but it's being designed by many interested parties. So I will skip all this, even though it's an interesting stuff. All I want to say here, it's an interesting graph, which tells you why in many instances people think of oil as one of the foundational ingredients for the basket of commodities, for a very simple reason. The trading in oil per year is bigger than trading in all other commodities combined. So there's just a lot of dough, so to speak. And this is a system like it was proposed by Sandy Pentland and I in this publication in Scientific American in 2016. and I will come to my conclusion. So stock flow consistent models are useful in describing the economy. In fact, in my mind, these are the only models which are worth kind of pursuing. These models show that money is created by commercial banks out of thin air when it is lent and destroyed when it is repaid. I want to make one nuance. For the longest of time, I was an advocate of this creation of money out of thin air. Now my view with age, I suppose, changed a little bit, and now I think that it is actually created against collateral. This is a very important point. Essentially, like when bank lends money for mortgage, it's actually does have a collateral. Collateral itself is being created simultaneously with money creation. And in fact, we can see if we look from the window, we can actually see very clearly how undeveloped land becomes collateral, then it becomes houses, then it becomes money, right? So central banks started to play a bigger role in money creation. Whether it's a good thing or not remains to be seen. It's very new. Digital Bretton Woods is needed, and distributed ledger technology can help, or general cryptography. Cryptocurrencies are interesting to watch, but difficult to use. CBDCs are appealing as a step towards building the purely digital economy. Stable coins can play an intermediate role in the interim. Decentralized finance is a promising development, although still relatively new and untested. And finally, digital trade coins are needed for the multipolar world. And I will stop here, and I will thank you. That's it.
Thank you, everyone, for watching the seminar by Professor Alex Lipton. And now we will open for questions.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. I think we all heard about modern portfolio theory. So how is the modern portfolio theory related to this topic?
Well, modern portfolio theory or modern monetary theory, because portfolio theory, as you know, it's something which you and I work every day, and Adil here and many other people from the team. Okay, so portfolio theory is slightly different topic, but monetary theory is it's a view that essentially you can issue as much money as you wish and things like that. So as far as I'm concerned, this theory is totally wrong. The inflation which the economies are going through reflects this possibility. I generally think that having outsized debt is not a very good idea, and that there is price to pay for increasing the volume of money indefinitely. And basically this graph will illustrate it as quite well, right? So essentially this fact that we have enormous increase in the assets and liabilities of the Federal Reserve, for example, reflects this thing that kind of, you have to have a balance in the economy, right? So central bank cannot issue money per se. They have to issue it against some assets. And so basically this monetization ends up with a lot of money in the system, right? A lot of money in the system, and then of course inflation. So which modern monetary theory did not believe it can happen, right? So but it's quite obvious actually. If there is a lot of kind of something, then everything else should be worth more of this something, right? So essentially I wanted to show this graph. Yes, this one again, it's roughly showing the same things, right? So once the mass of money becomes too big, inflation comes into play. And that's what the proponents of modern monetary theory did not want to recognize. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting, Professor. You mentioned the stable coins. Right. And they serve now as a linchpin, if you will, of this alternative system that's developed. What do you think in terms of the stability? In a sense, you mentioned Terra Luna, but
Right.
obviously the big one being Tether. I'd
Well,
love to get your thoughts.
Yes, well, okay. As I mentioned already, I myself am not sure where the corresponding collateral is held, who does it, and for what purpose, and what the composition of the portfolio. Tether never came with a convincing explanation. So if there is the collateral that's claimed, then it should be quite stable because it's cryptographically okay. It's based, it's built in what is called the Omni layer on top of the Bitcoin protocol, and the protocol itself is quite robust. But if there is no collateral, then of course all bets are off, right? So essentially, I think that a coin can be called stable only if essentially it's at least a little bit over collateralized. So I really don't know. I mean, in theory it should be stable, but whether or not it's stable in practice, very hard to say.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Professor. You mentioned on the stablecoin the collateralization, crypto, dynamic, or commodity.
Right.
What is your view regarding those kind of like basket of collateral? Can be different currency or different asset class that can, collateralize the stablecoin?
I'm a big fan of this idea, and in fact, what I didn't have time to talk about is pretty much exactly this type of stablecoin. Stability in this instance has to be understood differently, right? So basically, it's it means essentially low variability, because even if you use full collateralization with a basket of say 3 currencies, for example, US dollar, euro, and say Japanese yen, the value of this basket in any one currency would be constantly changing. So the thing is that this is a natural variation. This variation is natural, and so basically it should not be, people should not worry about that much. What kind of prevents Bitcoin and say Ethereum and other coins to really become a means of payment is extreme variability. And like when they were going up and up and up, it was maybe tolerable, at least for those people who had those coins. But when it went down, it became a real issue. And basically, this variability is what you want to avoid. And whether or not there is an international store of value, as I mentioned earlier, it does not yet exist, but whether or not it will be here in, say, 10 years, it's entirely possible.
When we talk about the whole cryptocurrency CBDC, there's really two components. There's one which is the plumbing of the system, moving money around, et cetera, et cetera. But then we have the government aspects. And
Right.
I think one question that I have is, we're assuming that inflation is bad or moderate inflation is bad, but I think the effective means of Western governments today, where they are not able to change tax policy in order to affect certain redistributions or investment across the economy, it's not tax and redistribute now, it's inflate and redistribute. And moving away from that really is a paradigm, I think, that will be very, very difficult for governments to go along with, given that this is their only and perhaps last lever to function.
Completely. You're absolutely right. And essentially, what I was trying to say is that there might be built an augmentation to the existing fiat system with some type of assets which are sufficiently liquid to be used as means of payment, but at the same time inflationary resistant. And as I said, it's not just my idea. I literally, if anything, I really literally stand on the shoulders of giants and real kind of thinkers, in this field, because, let me just find the list of those individuals. Yes, so it's basically commodity-based currencies, and as you can see, it went all the way to the old English school of thought, David Ricardo and Joseph Law and others, etc., etc. And then it was picked up in America during the Great Depression by Frank Graham, Benjamin Graham, who is actually a guru of Warren Buffett, as a matter of fact, Hayek, Keynes, Kaldor, and others. This idea has never been implemented in earnest, but it never died because there is a innate desire to have something to earn and don't need to worry about, right? So that's why I think that modern technology, this liquefaction and tokenization of proper pooled assets, give this idea a new lease of life. That's basically where I stand. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Alex. Given to the time, I think we can take only one questions from the in-person audience, and we'll also give the chance to the online audience for their questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your talk. When you're talking of international financial systems, so certainly their political agenda is attached to the economic decisions. So talking of your fully decentralized system of financial economy, so what kind of political challenges you see that they will impede the implementation of such decentralized conceptions when it comes to international monetary system?
Well, I mean, there are plenty. I mean, and what I think is that basically it has to, any decentralized system relies on consensus, and consensus can be technical consensus between different views of the same ledger on the one hand, or political consensus among powers that be who want to do things one way or the other. And so basically, in my mind, decentralized system will not replace a centralized one anytime soon. That I'm not advocating or expecting, but rather it can augment it in certain specific areas, like, as I said, commodity-based currency, extraterritorial store of value, and things of that nature. Abdallah, are there any questions from the online audience?
Yes, Professor. We've received a lot of interesting questions, but due to the time, so I will take only one of them. So the question is, what is the connection between the stock flow consistent model and the modern monetary theory? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that's the same question which Alexi already asked in the audience. And I think, frankly, that stock flow consistent system actually does describe what it promises to do, namely, stocks and flows in the economy and how flows result stocks and things like that. And then the modern monetary theory, I think, it's more on the fairy tale level. That's how I would characterize it. Okay.
Can I ask last theoretical question? I was thinking about since start of the seminar. If, for example, we can make a tax policy on every transaction made with blockchain, like to create blockchain transaction, will it help government to feel itself more stable and put more sure about any stable coin or anything like this?
That's a very interesting question, and the answer to your question is it somewhat depends on where the government wealth is coming from, right? So if government relies on taxation as the only source of income, then of course, this type of income coming from taxation of transactions, which would basically hark back to the old idea of a Tobin tax, would certainly be a welcome welcome addition to the variability of income sources of income for a government, right? Having said that, you know, like Tobin tax per se is not loved by, say, high-frequency traders because the imposition of this tax would essentially destroy their business model. That's why there is so much pushback. And I mean, trust me, from this high-frequency trading, if it's very profitable, so that there is plenty of Dow to go around to fight against this Tobin tax. But in principle, that certainly is a possibility, right? So charging a little bit for a transaction is not necessarily such a horrible idea. The other advantages for the government to have digital central bank digital currency or a very reliable stable coin is that it gives pretty much a possibility for nowcasting. In other words, you can actually see the flows in the system in real time and make your monetary decision or even fiscal decision based on up-to-date information, rather than going back to something which becomes available, like half a year after the fact and that sort of thing. So from that perspective, it's not entirely orthogonal to what is called the million price project, which Professor Rigabon, a colleague from MIT, is pursuing by trying to calculate real-time inflationary pressures from just literally scrapping the internet for prices on Amazon and Walmart and stuff like that. And so that's why it's called million price, because they could try to do it. So yes, that can actually be an attraction to a government which needs extra sources of income. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Alex. With this, this will come to the end of the seminar. Thank you everyone who joined online and who joined in person. So the slides and the recording of this seminar will be available on Adia Lab website at adialab.ae.
All right. Thank you, everybody.